Hi, this is Steve. Welcome back to Scale Model Kit Review. Now I want to give you the most comprehensive video on the tools that you might need to build part work kits, whether you're building the Knight Rider, the Ford GT, the Volkswagen T1 Samba, the Terminator, the Eleanor, the list goes on and goes on and goes on. So all these kits assembly requires you to at least screw in a bunch of screws. Some require you to glue in parts and such. So let's look at some of the tools that you'll need. Now some of these tools will be basic, but there'll be some other specialized tools that you probably never even thought of that you might want to get for your builds. So let's start off with the screwdrivers first. Alright, here's all the screwdrivers that you'll actually receive with your kits, complimentary, and they vary in size and they vary in style and all that. But what I do like about most of them is that they are magnetized, meaning they'll help you hold the screw in place while you try to screw it into the part. So here's a chuck for a Dremel tool. It's made of metal, and you can see that's magnetized there. And so this one also. Okay, not quite as much, but I'll show you how to fix that. And this one also. I mean, it is a heavy part, so you can increase the strength of the magnetic draw. You can see they're attracted to each other there. But these are some of the other ones that I've received in some of the builds, and they vary in size by the tip size for your screws. And these are very nice too because they have the larger handle. So if you get these types of screwdrivers in your builds, you probably don't need any others to help you along there. Now these are pretty common too on some of the kits. The only problem with this one, it's not magnetized, so that's an issue there. Now if you want to make your magnet stronger on your screwdriver, you can buy this tool right here. It's a demagnetizer or a magnetizer, and you just simply take your screwdriver and you rub it in the magnetized part, and it will make that screwdriver stronger. Okay, so that helps out a whole lot there. Alright, now let's look at some aftermarket screwdrivers that you can get that I would highly recommend. And that's these Wera screwdrivers, and they all come pretty much the same length like these here. These here also. So these are all magnetic. They're all very nice. And the one that I use the most is the PH1 screwdriver. It's the biggest one, and this is to drive in the larger screws into the axles and such like that. But it's a very good screwdriver. However, it is limited because the screws for the Terminator kit, it won't fit them. They're a smaller cross point screw, and this does not work on that. So you have to go to the next size, which is the PHO screwdriver, and that works great on the Terminator and all the other kits too. This is a popular size, the PHO, and that's the one you definitely want to have in your arsenal. Here's a PHOO, and that's for the tiny screws that you might receive in some of your builds. So what I can think of is some of the hinges that you put in for the Super Snake Mustang. There's some hinges that have some really tiny screws, and then of course these are the same type of screwdrivers. These are ESD type of screwdrivers, but they are also, actually they aren't magnetized. So these two here are not. These are designed for working with electronics, and you don't want to have magnetic screwdrivers for electronics. So I would not recommend those for driving in screws in this case. They're nice to have as backups, but other than that, that's what they are. Okay. Now, size. You may need to have a stubby screwdriver to get into some areas. So I would recommend a stubby screwdriver of some sort that's not as long and allows you to get into tight areas. So that's the reason for that. Now, to help the screws go into the metal parts, let's look at some of the stuff that you'll need to help you along with that. Okay, because I'm seeing too many builds out there, newer builds out there, a lot of them from Europe, but that the guys aren't using any kind of oils or anything like that on their builds to help drive those screws into the metal parts. So let's look at that next. So let's look at the lubricants for the screws to help you along. Now, I started my builds probably about 2.5 to 3 years ago, and back then I was watching other people's builds, and they were struggling to get screws into those parts. And I was like, why don't you just put some oil on that? It's really going to help out. And today I'm watching some builds, and same thing, people are struggling to get their screws in. So do yourself a favor, you at least want to have this available while you're building your models. And definitely want to have it when you're driving the screws into metal parts. All right, so in the beginning I started using chapstick, and moisturized chapstick in this case, and that worked great. It helped me along, and I knew I wanted to switch over to Vaseline because it's hypoallergenic, it's harmless to your skin and all that, and it's very safe to use. So I did switch over to that when I was able to get it, because during the pandemic you couldn't find this anywhere. It was hard to get. So I would recommend at least Vaseline. Now some folks are using the 3-in-1 oil. A lot of this stuff is used in your sewing machines, and I happen to use this on my 3D printer, and it works great there. But I just think it's too messy. This stuff is just too messy to use, so that's why I like using the Vaseline. I have a little more control. But you can also use some lithium grease that you can get from Tamiya for their RC line of cars. When you're running RC, you want to have stuff lubricated, so a lot of folks use that too. Okay, now this is a little applicator you can buy for applying the Vaseline, and those are very nice. I'll put a link below for all the tools I'm showing you in this review. Now you definitely do not want to use any of this stuff on your screws that are going into plastic. It could be detrimental to that plastic and cause the plastic to deteriorate. Now it's not just plastic, it's ABS. The ABS is a little bit stronger and harder, but still these oils can be detrimental to that ABS. So if you're having problems getting screws into ABS, you can use dishwashing soap, okay? Liquid dishwashing soap. And that will help you get the screw into the plastic, and then it will naturally evaporate and be harmless to the plastic or the ABS parts. Now, what do you do with the screws after they're installed? Especially on a lot of these builds, you have a screw and a nut, and through time, they'll back off and loosen up. So, Loctite. You can get either the red Loctite, or I have here the blue Loctite. And you just put that on the threads, and it'll keep the threads locked, and you won't lose those parts later on. How do I know this? I moved from Tucson to West Virginia for a year because of my job when I was working. But when I got there, I discovered a lot of the nuts had backed off on some of my car builds, and I hadn't used this stuff. So I would highly recommend using this on some of your builds, just to lock those threads onto the nuts. Now some of the builds require glues, so let's look at that next. And here's an assortment of glues. So you have this Rapid Fuse by DAP. That's a really thick bonding type glue, and that's great to use there. You have a liquid super glue that I get from Loctite. It's easily found at your big box stores. And then I have a no-run super gel glue, and then the Gorilla Glue gel. But to help those along, you can also get yourself some accelerator. Okay, that's the key there. Apply your glue, hold the part in place for a few seconds, and then shoot it with some accelerator, and that will help it along immensely. You want to be careful with super glues. You get those on your fingers, it's a good idea to get some debonder. So this debonder is great, but be very careful when applying this around painted parts and such like that, because it will take the paint off of your parts. So just be very careful and cautious when using this around your car, your cars and all that have that really nice finish and paint on them, because it will remove that paint. But this will get the glue off your fingers, definitely. Well, what about regular model cement? So here's some examples of the model cement. This is Model Master by Testers, the Fowler, and then the Revell Contacta. And You want to go ahead and use these if you're truly gluing together plastic. Okay, if it's a plastic part. If it's ABS, then you want to go with a specialized ABS glue for that. So the Tamiya makes an ABS glue, and that works great. So I would recommend that for some plastic parts. Also, you have some liquid cement too, the Mr. Hobby or even Tamiya extra thin. I wouldn't recommend these because these will just get all over the place, and there aren't many parts, to tell you the truth, in these builds that are made of plastic. Most of them are ABS plastic. Now let's look at some stuff you might want to use to protect some of the wiring on your builds. Maybe make the wiring a little stronger near the contacts or where the soldering points are. And what I use for that is I use this Tulip Slick. This is a real thick paint, acrylic paint. It's a fabric paint, and it works great for protecting those contacts and making those soldering points a little stronger. And I just like using it. I've been using it all along in my builds. If you've been following any of my builds, you'll see that I do apply this to a lot of the circuit boards and a lot of the contact and the switches and such. So I love that. All right, some of the other tools that you may want to consider having in your arsenal when you're building all this stuff. Number one is a small hammer, and believe it or not, we had to use the hammer in my last stage that I built for the Jaguar, installing the windshield frame up front. They wanted you to pound in the sides, and applying your super glues. Use this tool called the glue looper, and that's very handy for getting the super glue into tight areas. Of course, an X-Acto knife, you want to have that so you can cut off, if you're cutting off parts off a sprue tree, that would be handy there too. It's also good for trimming the sprue nibs off the tree. And a good pair of scissors, right? You may need that also. The other part of that is a good set of sprue cutters, and that will help get your parts off the sprue trees. A lot of these kits have those, so these are very helpful, and you want to have a good set of sprue cutters available for that. Tweezers. You'll notice in the instructions that they show a lot of pictures show them holding parts with tweezers. Now don't follow that. They're only doing that to show you that part a little easier in the photograph, in the instructions, so it's easier for you to make out what that part looks like. But I would recommend most of your parts, put them in place with your fingers, because if you're holding let's say a spoke for the Jaguar with this, it's going to go flying off into oblivion and you'll never find it. So every time they show using tweezers, you don't necessarily need to use tweezers to do that. Now, tweezers are handy, but just keep in mind that that part could go flying. So whether or not you want to use that tweezer for that portion of the build is going to be up to you. But they do have a use, but when you're talking about tiny parts that aren't replaceable and they go flying, that's a bad thing. With these builds, you're going to receive plastic parts that are on sprue trees, and after you cut them off, you want to sand off the nubs. So there's all different options out there for sanding off the nubs off your parts, and the ones that are more readily available are ones like these. You can find these at Hobby Lobby or Michael's, along with this one here too, or you can order them specially from specific companies that specialize in modeling products, but definitely have yourself some good sanding arsenal there. Now, some of the parts are press fit together, and you may find yourself having to separate those parts later on to do something, and you're going to need yourself a good part separator. And this comes from the Gundam world, because a lot of your Gundams are press fit together, snap together kits, and this helps you separate those parts, but you can also use this also. There's cheaper versions on the internet for this. This one's a little more expensive than most, but you can just find the tools that are available for working on an iPhone or working on your Android phone, for opening up compartments on it. They have basically the same type of tool in there to help you separate the cases and all that on that. So definitely have one of these too. Now you may be required to tape your parts. A lot of times when I'm building my cars and such, I'll tape them to hold things together. So what you can do with that is get yourself some good low-tack painter's tape, and that works great for taping parts together, you know, so you can hold things in place before you screw them together. Or you can use the Tamiya tape also. That works great too. It is virtually low-tack also and works great for that in that case. I zoomed in on these parts. These actually came with the build, so while I was building the GTR, they actually give you a little wrench. So you don't want to lose that. You want to keep it in a safe place, and I'll show you where you can keep stuff like this in a safe place so you don't lose them. And also, while I've been building the Terminator, they gave us a little Allen wrench screw to put in some screws there too. You definitely don't want to lose that because you're going to be using that throughout your build. So to keep these small tools and your extra screws, I recommend a pillbox such as this. You can keep your screws organized and you know what size they are. And that's what I've been doing all along for all my builds. So I have quite a collection of boxes with all my screws saved up. And you definitely want to save them because you might be shorted some when you receive them. And if you have spares, you're in great shape for continuing on with your build. A lot of the builds give you photo etch parts. Photo etch is the very thin metal that's been etched into a shape or like into grills and such like that. And you're going to have some tools to help you bend those. A lot of times you can do it with your finger, but it helps to have the tools. Now you don't necessarily need to buy a real expensive photo etch bending tool such as this. You can just simply have a ruler. Maybe even this has a metal edge to it, and use a razor blade, a flat edge razor blade, to help you bend that photo edge. Okay, photo etch. Now you can use some pliers if you like. So let's look at the pliers next. So here's some pliers. A good set of needle nose pliers, ones that are designed for the hobby. Those are handy. And a good set of flat nose pliers. Also a good set of plastic tip pliers. I use these for building the Terminator, the fingers and the toes. Helps get those pins in place. This is not necessary, but this is an RC car stand. And this has been handy for some of my builds to put the chassis of a car on while I'm doing other things to the chassis. And it just helps it hold it up off the bench a little bit. Works great. It does rotate. So, you know, you don't have to get this, but it's a nice tool to have while you're building these part work kits. And another thing I recommend is a good set of magnifier lenses. And these are great here because they fit on just like regular glasses. You can put them over the top of you. If you wear glasses, you can put this over the top of them, which is what I do. And they're great. It has a LED lights. Here you go. Goes brighter or dimmer and then off. So those work great. I highly recommend those. Clamps. You might need some clamps to hold parts together while you're putting screws in or while you're gluing parts together. I had to use some clamps for the Terminator. So those are very handy to have in your arsenal also. And lastly, a good flashlight, mini flashlight, and this will help you look into the hard to see areas, which I use quite a bit during my builds, so I would recommend that also. So I'll be right back. And there you go. I hope this video helped you out with deciding the type of tools you'll need to help you build your kits. And I've enjoyed every one of these builds. I've been having fun the past 3 years building all these cars and such. So if you like my content, please subscribe to my channel, hit the bell for all video upload notifications, and please give me a thumbs up. And what really helps out is if you comment down below. So please comment. You know, if you have some additional tools you want to tell me about, let me know, and I'll add them to another video a little bit later. So this was actually suggested by one of my followers, and it's just taken me this long to finally come out with a video for this. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Happy modeling, everybody, and take care.